Before we start, I want to thank all of the Weird Libertarians patrons for being a part of the show. You can find out all of the benefits of subscribing on Patreon at joinwalplus.com. That's WAL plus.com. You'll get bonus content, access to the complete archives. There's over 1,000 shows that you can't get in the public feed, and you'll be supporting all of our great shows. Thank you especially to our $100 a month members, John Pusilo, Vincent Peichel, Lars Nordskog, Jake Edel, Matthew Durbin, Reinhold, Christy Avery, and Jason Doolittle. We also want to thank our main sponsor for this episode. It is Iconic Insurance. 15% of Americans are left to find health insurance on their own. And even if you get health insurance from your employer that doesn't work for you, Matt Allen and Iconic Insurance can help you find the right insurance. Just head over right now and contact him at iconic-insurance.com/libertarians. We'll put the link in the description if you can't remember that. But Matt is a longtime listener of this program and a great guy and a good friend of mine. So please go support him and reach out right now. Thank you. And now let's get started with our show. You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com. Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Thank you so much for being here. We are so glad to have you joining us. And today we're going to be talking about environmental stuff, environmental regulations, and Joe Biden's recent... I'm going to ask my expert guest, Jakob Puckett, because I am not an expert in anything. If you listen to this show, then you know I'm here talking to smart people. I'm an expert in podcasting, and that's about it. And I'm marginal at best. So my guest today is Jakob Puckett, who is an energy analyst and a Young Voices contributor. And we always love talking to all these great Young Voices contributors. They always have so many interesting, like, you Young Voices contributors, you're really smart. You're all very personable. And you write about stuff that nobody else in the news is talking about. Like, if you only watch the news or kind of scroll your Facebook feed, Jakob, it's just Roe v. Wade. But, you know, you sent me your article about coming on, and, you know, I don't even know what the National Environmental Policy Act is, and I knew there was some sort of climate emergency. You know, tell us a little bit about yourself, and how did you get into policy work, and how do you find what you write about?
Well, good afternoon, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show. And I got into this, I would like to think, very carefully. But
as one does, yes.
I've always been interested in the policy side of energy production or environmental protection. And, you know, those two often overlap in great measure. And if you look about one step behind the news, there's all sorts of stuff going on, like you mentioned, that might not be front page or ticker at the bottom of the screen screaming at you in the headlines, but these are things that have been going on behind the scenes for years, and they take a long time to work themselves out. So there are lots of different policies. The one that you mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act, or as it's now called, whether or not
it used to be Build Back Better, and then they just changed the name, and it's the same thing.
More or less, yeah. Whether it will reduce inflation in any meaningful way is to be determined, but...
Let me just go ahead and answer for you. Absolutely not. It will not. It will do the opposite, but go ahead. You're a neutral journalist. I'm not.
So in this, like you said, it's basically the Build Back Better redux, just a little bit pared down from what the president could not get through Congress last year. And essentially is what Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia has agreed to. And in terms of energy policy, in my opinion, this is largely bad news. And there are a couple reasons for that. The first reason is it would extend massive subsidies specifically for wind and solar technology. Now, I have nothing against these technologies. They're great, they're innovative, and if we can produce energy in a way that has as minimal an environmental impact as possible, I'm all for it. But these are also mature technologies that have been around for decades. These tax credits and these subsidies have been around for 30 years now. These are mature technologies. They don't need continual handouts and support to continue to keep growing the way that they have.
Yeah, so a lot of what is in the Inflation Reduction Act is what? Is it just describe a handout. If you've got a couple examples for folks who maybe aren't familiar with how congressional funding in these big omnibus bills work, what does that look like?
Sure. So specifically with wind and solar, we'll just pick wind for an example. It is a beneficiary of what is called the production tax credit. So for each megawatt hour of electricity that it produces, it will receive a certain tax credit that's set congressionally. It'll decline over the years, but it's still a fairly large amount. And what that does is it's obviously an incentive to get this tax credit. But I think the levels right now are around $20 per megawatt hour. So when prices for electricity drop below $20 per megawatt hour, as they sometimes do in certain conditions, that means that these companies can essentially run losses and still be making a profit from the subsidy. That's not good. It turns the market into all sorts of a wacky dynamic. And we've seen problems with that throughout the country over the past couple years, and this shouldn't be continuing.
Yeah, so in other words, when I hear tax break or tax cut, or I'm all for a business not having to pay more taxes because that means they can hire more employees. But what you're saying in this case, we're artificially carrying these businesses along, and at some point the money has to run out or will run out, and it has to be viable on its own. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, wind and solar are sort of the favorites, but they can't be part of the total solution, which is, in my opinion, nuclear. I don't know if you saw that. I think it was yesterday there was an approval for a small nuclear reactor, and there's some nuclear technology. Is there anything in here that might address, helping that along, and some of the stuff that like Purdue University is doing in terms of small neighborhood reactors?
So the key with this type of policy is to create a level playing field for all sorts of generation technologies to compete. That could be wind, that could be nuclear, like you just mentioned.
Is that your goal or is that their goal?
That is the goal that I would like to see. I think that's the best way forward. Unfortunately, I'm not in Congress, so that is two different goals.
Well, you're not 97 and you seem smart, so we can't have you in Congress. Yeah, I mean, you'd like to see a level playing field, and so it doesn't sound like that's necessarily the case with this.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you're right, Chris. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission did, it's a big first step, finally grant a company called NuScale to create America's first small modular nuclear reactor. It should be online in 2029. So 7 years from now, these things take time to build. You got to go through all sorts of other permitting processes to get that approval. But it's a big step because this is the future of nuclear generation, nuclear power, not just in America, but across the world. And we've been behind the ball on this for several years now. Numerous other countries have been taking these pared down, scaled back nuclear reactors compared to the nuclear power plants that we're used to hearing about from last generation. And they've got all sorts of beneficial attributes. They're safer, they're cheaper, and because they're more modular, they can be put in places where you might need more power, but you don't need so much that you'd have to build a huge traditional nuclear power plant. So I'm not familiar with the Purdue study that you mentioned about neighborhood reactors, but that's a great example where if you have huge population growth in one area and you need more electricity, this is a great way to start adding that extra energy that you need. And if that area continues to grow, well, guess what? Just build another one. Yeah. And that way you can get cleaner electricity just continually, incrementally throughout time.
You talk in the article about one of the obstacles being regulation and local grids. And I hear this a little bit. I have a friend who works in the energy sector, and they're like, we can't have electric cars, and there's solar flares coming. And I didn't really understand what he meant. But is there a problem with our electric grid that needs to be fixed, and that is a hurdle? Like, can you fill us in on that? Scare us, please.
Sure, scare you. Sure. So one of the main obstacles or challenges, we'll say challenges, is as more things throughout the economy become electrified, you need more transmission and distribution infrastructure to get the electricity from the power plant to where it's being used. So for instance, if you had a city where most of the buildings were heated by natural gas in the winter, now they're converting over to heat pumps, you've completely changed the fuel source. So you need to be able to replace all of the power that you were getting from natural gas with electricity. Same concept with electric vehicles. You're no longer using gasoline, you're using electricity. So you have a large increase in electric demand that might be rising faster than the transmission and distribution power lines capacity to be able to meet that demand. And that's where you get into challenges with things like the National Environmental Protection Act, National Environmental Policy Act. It's a law from about 50 years ago where it says you have to have a certain level of environmental impact review for large projects. It's not just related to only energy infrastructure, but that definitely falls underneath it. And ironically, what it's become over time is a way for environmentalist groups to block building of any kind, whether that's more transmission lines to carry increased carbon-free electricity, or just even building clean electricity power plants themselves. There are more than twice as many clean energy power plants that are held up under the NEPA reviews than there are fossil fuel plants right now. So in kind of a ironic twist of fate, it's stifling the very thing that it was supposed to help.
You know, we always talk about, as I always say, libertarians of, I don't know if you're a libertarian, I am, you seem like a free market type guy. We can sometimes be all change and no hope. We don't talk a lot about solutions. So when you're looking at the future in terms of energy policy, Joe Biden, well, let me ask this first before we talk solutions, because I want to keep criticizing Joe Biden. It feels so nice. When he wants to enact a climate emergency and enact, you know, when Trump introduced for the first time since World War II the National Defense Production Act for ventilators, which we ended up not needing, and commandeering businesses to make those, you knew that was the beginning of a precedent that every president from here on out will enact. Joe Biden has been no different in that. How has he used that act, and what does it mean when he declares a state of emergency over the climate?
The Defense Production Act is a very bad way to advance your policy. It's very usage of the DPA is very fickle, and it varies quickly from administration to administration. So in addition to what you just mentioned from President Trump using the DPA for ventilators, he also considered using that same law to bail out coal plants. Now, he ultimately didn't do it, but the fact that he was even considering that shows you just how broadly this can be applied and just swaying back and forth really quickly in a couple years. And this law is supposed to be used for true emergencies. We're talking, we're in a war or something like that, not as a way to push through your policy that Congress didn't want to support. So President Biden has now used the Defense Production Act a couple times to boost, or to attempt to boost, mining for rare earth minerals. These are materials that are very important for making things like battery storage, whether that's for backing up a power plant or putting it in an electric vehicle, or things like solar panels. Now, the really ironic part about how he's using it is that the same Biden administration is making it harder to mine those very rare earth minerals through lots of environmental hurdles. And he's now trying to subsidize the very things he's making it harder to produce. So it almost seems like the administration's left hand does not know what its far left hand is doing, to paraphrase Ronald Reagan. But the DPA, in short, is a bad way to try to advance your goals.
So what are some solutions? I mean, you mentioned in the article there's no shortage of free market solutions or businesses that want to get involved in the green sector. Do we need government, to solve the climate crisis? Some would say we need a carbon tax. Elon Musk in the past said on 60 Minutes it's the only way. Do you agree with that? Or what can we do to help mitigate it?
So here's what I'll say. What we need the government to do in this situation is to create a level playing field and clear out unnecessary obstacles. There is lots of private capital that is just looking for some environmentally sound investments. And it's way more than just wind and solar. That's nuclear power, that's hydropower, that's carbon capture and storage. There really is no limit to what we could invent in the future to deal with reducing emissions from the energy sector. What we have right now is what we know, but some of these things didn't exist 20 years ago. Now we have them. Who knows what 2040 will look like? But we need to, for instance, to take nuclear power as an example, the licensing regime for building and starting up a traditional nuclear power plant is trying to take the new technology, the small reactors, and shoehorn it into the same regulatory process and review for the old nuclear power generator.
Which we haven't had a new generator since the 70s, I believe, right?
Since the 70s, yeah. So it's 50 years out of date already, and it's a different type of technology. They work differently, and you shouldn't be trying to make these two things overlap that aren't really in the same category. So you need to update those rules, and then you can get more small nuclear reactors like NuScale will be doing out in Idaho over the next few years. And then hydropower as well. There are a lot of dams that their licenses are coming up on the end of their useful life within the next couple years. But ironically, it takes longer to relicense a hydroelectric dam than it does to license a completely new hydroelectric dam. So it's a complete misalignment of priorities. We need to keep these dams online because they've been working for the past 50 years. We don't need to get rid of them. And we need to make it easier to bring more hydroelectric dams online. There are over 80,000 dams in the US, but only 3% of them are outfitted with the technology to produce electricity. There's a huge opportunity there. And I find it hard to believe that if the obstacles weren't taken away, private capital would not step in and see this as an opportunity.
All right, Jakob Puckett, shameless self-promotion time. Tell us where the people can follow your work and read more of what you do.
You can find me on Twitter at Jakob R. Puckett. That's Jacob with a K. And you can also follow me on Muckrack. Just search for my name there as well. You'll see all my ratings.
All right, great. Jacob, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, listener, for being a part of the show. If you learned something, then please share it with your friends. That is the best way to help any podcast grow. So we really appreciate your time, and we will see you again soon. This podcast was produced and edited by Chris Spangle and Leaders and Legends, LLC. If you're interested in starting a podcast or taking yours to the next level, please contact us at leadersandlegends.net.